It's a privilege to be here and to lead our conversation here tonight. As we've heard, it'll be about hospitality, and I'm really excited to have these two scholars right next to me who have studied and thought a lot about hospitality. And we'll get into their research and some of the models and ways that they've tried to understand how to be hospitable. But before that, I think we want to take on just a kind of a personal initial approach. And to do that, I thought I would just open us with a question about your own experience. Can you tell us each about a moment when you felt that being hospitable was genuinely hard for you? A conversation, a relationship, a public moment where that felt difficult. And I think we'll start with Matthew, and then we'll go to Amanda.
Sure. Thank you. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you. A couple of different moments come to mind. The first is just this last couple of years having some very dear Jewish friends and some very dear Muslim friends who, amidst the struggle over Gaza, between Gaza and Israel, each set came to me making a strong case for Gaza or a strong case for Israel amidst the conflict, and sort of pleading with me to, join their side, or calling on me to speak out on their behalf, and appealing to my Christian values and my Christian witness. And I think the pain for me was that I could not give them everything they wanted. And I deeply love them. I hear their cries, and I have strong feelings about the issue myself. But this sense of I want to agree with their side, but I can't fully go with it. And feeling pulled. That was deeply hard for me. The other hard one was I was invited to the Islamic Society of North America, which is I think it might be the largest national conference of Muslims in America. And as an evangelical theologian, political ethicist, I was invited to speak in front of a group of about 500 Muslims. And afterwards, they opened it up for a conversation. And they asked a lot of hard questions of me. Particularly about how evangelicals have treated them in the United States. Really tough questions, tough challenges. And I would say that some of their challenges I didn't feel like were quite fair, but some of them were. And in that moment, I wanted to become defensive. To be honest, I wanted to just run away. It was quite uncomfortable. But I think that's ultimately what difference does to us. Whether you're in a fight with your parents about politics, or you and your roommate have differences of opinion about issues of racial justice. You go home for Thanksgiving and your uncle is making fun of some issue that you care about. When we encounter difference, our shoulders come up, our teeth tighten, we make little fists, our hands get sweaty, and in those kinds of situations, we are rarely proud of how we respond. And so those are just a few of my own experiences. And as someone who works on these issues, professionally and academically, I would love to say I'm always proud of how I behave, but I'm not at all.
That's great. Amanda?
I think mine is actually kind of related. My family is from one of a string of about 5 or 6 Christian villages, and my family has been displaced for 2.5 years, and most of our town has been razed, and there's just not a lot of prospects for going back anytime soon for most people. And so the conflict that has transpired in the Middle East since October 7th has touched me very personally and very deeply. That town is where my dad is buried. And, it's hard to think, I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back to visit him. But at the same time, that my family is this small Christian minority in an area that is controlled by Hezbollah, pretty much. They have their own struggle with hospitality because they don't necessarily agree with their neighbors about how politics, religion, how everything's happening. But that's not my life. I can go, I can visit, and then I can have my lofty ideas about how we should interact with our Shia neighbors, and then I can come back to the U.S.
So I hear a couple of gestures, to use a word that Matthew's used in his research as well. Self-denial as a gesture, recognizing complexity as a gesture, fleeing as a gesture, like I want to turn away and run. And I'm wondering if there are any others that we're missing kind of from personal experience that we would add to those as typical types of responses when we're put into a difficult situation.
Right. Yeah. So difference makes us uncomfortable. And the typical human response is fight or flight. But also there can be a desire to also assimilate or moderate, which is to, I can tell that my difference is making you uncomfortable, so I'm going to try and fit in with you just so that we can all feel comfortable. So a lot of racial minorities will talk about code switching, where they'll talk or act or behave like their dominant culture. So assimilating or moderating. So I can tell that my opinion about abortion or about guns or something is freaking you out. So I'm going to kind of soften my edges so you feel more comfortable. And all of these kinds of behaviors, whether it be fight or flight, assimilate or moderate, what they assume is that difference is a problem that we have to solve right now. And somebody has to move, as opposed to actually our differences can be a gift to one another. And I'll give you an example. My Muslim colleague and I, we had been talking about grace for a while, and he was getting frustrated about this concept of grace. He likes the language of law, and God is someone that you obey, and either you obey or you don't. And so he decided to pick up the book of Galatians to learn about grace. And he was quite upset about it, actually, because he said, well, Matt, why don't you Christians just sin more so you can get forgiven more?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. And I said, Shaddy, believe it or not, you're not the first person to think of that. But in that moment where he was wrestling with how can God forgive? How could God die for me? He was wrestling, and he and I had a different opinion about this. But it was actually a wonderful thing for me as a Christian to witness his wrestling, because he understood the scandal of the gospel, that God would die. And so that difference, his decision to be different and to disagree with me, actually was a blessing to me. And so sometimes when we moderate or assimilate or try to fit in, we think we're doing a favor to someone else, but our strangeness can actually be a gift. So
I'll ask some specific question.
Yeah.
When you were having this conversation with him, were you in person or were you on the phone? Were you on Zoom?
We were in person.
Yeah. So I think this ties to Amanda's experience as well. I mean, is there a different set of gestures that we're more likely to occupy when we're with somebody in the same room versus if we're, thousands of miles away, versus if we're thinking about it in really abstract terms?
Well, I want to answer that question. Actually, the medium of social media tends to reward conflict and fighting. So if you are a participant in social media, if you lash out, you will get more likes, more retweets. The algorithm actually rewards you for the posture and the gesture of aggression. And so that medium shapes and forms us to take that kind of posture. It rewards us for that. Yeah. Whereas face-to-face, people tend to be, and especially over meals and food, that tends to be a much more conducive medium for that kind of thing. Yeah.
Amanda, any thoughts as you live with family that's all over and in different communities?
Yeah, food, for sure. I mean, food is like a almost unnecessary for hard conversations, I find.
We gave them all burritos.
Burritos, right.
So you all are in good shape, right?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of a recent kind of interpersonal conversation I had with family, not related to any of these dynamics, where just having dinner together and, just having to look at each other and doing this thing that all humans have to do multiple times a day. There's something about that can kind of disarm you and disarm them a little bit. So I'm a big proponent of, doing things around a table. I also think, I don't know if this is like an official, response, but I think curiosity is a great way to respond. In moments when you just feel like I'm getting defensive and I just want to say my thing, and get my point of view out there so I can be heard and in an accurate way, and that I can kind of do justice to my point of view. Sometimes letting yourself, that's like a small death, to just not put yourself in the middle and to say, and to ask a question instead, and that, I think that preserves the, I'm not assimilating or moderating, but it can kind of create some space.
Yeah. And I think, when you feel yourself getting hyped up, actually saying to the person, tell me more, as a way to delay your turn to talk, just as a way of sort of just I want to fight back. Oh, I want to drop the mic on you. And when you feel that coming up, just say, tell me more. I want to give you more time to share this opinion, which is absolutely terrible, right? But I want to give you that space and listen, because I need to do some work on me before I open my mouth again, because I can tell I'm not in a good spot to talk yet. You can always invite them to tell you more. Yeah.
This is great. And we'll circle back around to some of these practical strategies, I think, towards the end of our conversation. But one of the things that this initial sharing of experiences underscores is that this is difficult and costly, that our impulse is not to be hospitable, and that there's effort that's going in to sort of check that or respond to that initial sort of feeling of difficulty. And I think that's really important, just kind of honesty. This is hard. This is not something that we're having a forum about because it's really easy. We wouldn't be here otherwise. So I want to take us now into a little bit more of the abstract world for a little bit, and to talk a little bit about models and how to actually get to hospitality through that difficulty. And some of the conflicts that emerge as people are occupying the world with people they don't like, come from fundamental questions of metaphysics, questions of what the good life looks like, questions of justice, of security, of safety. And an example of this sort of question, and there's one that, there's one of many, but one that maybe is relevant to both of your research. And it's a question that sometimes I've heard Christians ask is, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? And so maybe you can give a quick answer to that question, or if you don't want to answer the question, you could tell us how you would go about answering that question. What are the methods that you would use?
Sure. Well, I did a podcast episode with my Muslim colleague on this question, and he was asking me over and over and over, let's have this discussion. I was like, Shadi, no, I don't want to talk about it. And he was like, Matt, we're going to do this. So we scheduled the conversation. And for those of you who want to listen to it, the podcast is called Zealots at the Gate, and where Muslim and evangelical go at it. But for this particular discussion, I'm not copping out here, but I would say yes and no when it comes to the question of, do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? So yes, in the sense that there is only one God, and that God hears you when you pray, even if you pray terribly, which we all do. None of us offer prayers that are worthy of God's holiness, God's righteousness. As an evangelical Christian, I believe that it's only by Christ that I can approach God.
Romans 8, right? That's yeah.
So in one sense, God hears everyone's cries. God hears the atheist crying out, when her child dies. God hears that cry. So there is only one God, and that God hears everything, whether you know that you are crying out to the God of Jesus or not. So in one sense, yes. But in the other sense, no, because Muslims and Christians have huge theological differences that are really important. And to say we both worship the same God is to do damage to the distinctive beauty of Christianity and the distinctive beauty of Islam, which I really get frustrated. It feels disrespectful to me. I can remember I was on a panel with my Muslim buddy with a more progressive Muslim. And my Muslim buddy and I were talking about the deep differences between Islam and Christianity. And the other panelist got frustrated. She says, "Why do you guys keep talking about the differences between Christians and Muslims? We all care about love. We all care about justice. We're all basically the same." And I was getting ready to respond. And my Muslim buddy goes, "I've got this." And he leans forward and he says, "You don't understand. My friend here believes Jesus is God, that he died for his sins." My Muslim buddy basically outlined the gospel. He said, "We're not the same." So I guess there's so much more to say about the question, but I think those two things have to be said. But yeah. I don't know, Amanda. What do you think? I want to hear from you.
I think my answer is this similar cop-out. I think I have a yes and a no kind of in my mind as well. Well, I think we agree, because we've talked about this, that we actually don't think it's the important question. Because the reality is that there are beautiful similarities between Christianity and Islam, and I think they are a foundation on which to do social work, service, to make the world a better place in terms of meeting physical needs. That is a shared foundation. And at the same time, that there are really deep differences. And those deep differences go back to the character of God and the nature of God. And so I think, how do you answer this question? Without kind of, I think that the important thing is that there are differences and they don't matter for living together and being hospitable to one another. I think those things are separate in my mind.
I like what you said about just the frustration with the question itself, because it doesn't actually fix the issue. So let's say I'm a very progressive religious person, and I say we all worship the same God and these differences don't matter. It actually doesn't solve the issue that Muslims, Jews, Christians today are fighting a lot. And just papering over the differences does not immediately make peace. There are profound fights that are going on that are not going to be papered over by saying we all worship the same God, or we're all ending up in the same place because we disagree today.
Okay, so you both dodged this question. Are there?
Okay, do you want me to give? I actually think it's a yes, but that, and I think part of the struggle for Christians with this question is that we came first. Okay, because think about it this way from a historical, sociological perspective. Jews came before Christians, right? That faith tradition was established first. So as Christians, we have really clear ideas about where it fits into our story. Now, if you ask a lot of Jewish people, they're like, I don't know what you guys did with our tradition, but that is some weird stuff. Jesus got how is the law fulfilled in this guy who keeps breaking the law? So I think if you ask a Jewish person how they feel about the fact that we're utterly convinced that we worship the same God, or that at least that's the God of Abraham is the God of Jesus, I think they might recoil. And so I think there is a historical aspect to this. The fact that Islam comes after Christianity means that when Islam was founded as a religion, it had to contend with the presence of Christianity and Judaism. We know that Muhammad interacted with Christian tribes and Jewish tribes, and that, those ideas were kind of circulating, even though the predominant culture in the Arabian Peninsula was pagan. And so the reality is that Muhammad and early Muslims had to think about where what they were founding fit in with what came before. And that's why Muslims have a much more clear and elaborate, I think, understanding of how we fit in for them. And I think we don't have that for them.
I love what you just done there, Amanda, because you've actually performed a bit of hospitality on behalf of that that faith position. You sort of said, now I kind of understand why this is a question that has these implications for you as a Muslim, even if I don't agree or I do agree, depending on, yes or no to the answer question. You've just tried to occupy and understand a little bit of their context. And this leads me to, maybe a version of the larger question here is, are there questions that we must figure out and say we agree on this before we can be hospitable to somebody? Or are these all questions that we can sort of say, there's a little bit of room here. We got to figure out what's going on. Some latitude. Are there places that we must agree before we can be hospitable to somebody? Are there questions that we must agree on the answers to before we can be hospitable to them?
So I'm answering this question as a Christian, and I guess I would just say that God sent his son to save the world while we were still sinners. So God's hospitality towards us was not conditional. That, I didn't have to do something to earn God's hospitality. And that is the kind of life that I've been purchased for. And so a sort of conditional hospitality, I think, is not what God demonstrates. And
here you mean the condition being, we must agree on this before I'm going to be hospitable to you? Is that the condition?
Yeah. So I think that the command to love your enemies is an interesting one, right? Because Jesus is naming that we have enemies. And it's not love your enemies if they can agree to 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just love your enemies. So I don't hear Jesus throwing out a lot of conditions on these sorts of things for those who he would show hospitality for, and similarly for us. And he does seem to call them to a kind of hospitality that is costly for them, like it was costly for him. So that's a rough, as a Christian ethicist, that's tough, right? Because there are lots of people that I don't want to be hospitable to. There are lots of ideas and perspectives that I don't want to be hospitable to. So then, then you're getting into questions of discernment of how do I wisely respond to these kinds of things. So feel free to push me, though.
Do you think that are we hiding behind a masquerade of we must satisfy these answers before I'm willing to be hospitable? Is that a defense back to our gestures? Is that one of our gestures? Or is there any intellectual merit, any interpersonal merit in actually hashing out a metaphysical question, a question of justice, a question of safety?
Well, I guess I would say hospitality. Hospitality always includes certain boundaries, and that's appropriate. And so, I think I would need you to put a little more, put that to the ground. Like, give me an example of what you're talking about. So talk through conditions. Give me an example. What are some conditions
we must agree on a particular vision of a nation before I'm going to be hospitable to you. We must agree on a particular form of table manners before I'm going to let you into my house. Yeah. We must agree on a form of what families should look like before I'm going to let you come and be part of or interact with my family. Those sorts of things. Yeah.
So I think just the nature of pluralism within America, we're never going to have agreement on any of those kinds of things. So believing in the doctrine of sin means that humanity is broken and is struggling with itself. And so there is never going to be an agreement on what it means to be an American. So that's going to be a contested space. A political philosophy, and we can do a little theory here, is the political philosophy called agonism. And the agon, in ancient Greece was this place where athletes would come together to wrestle one another, and they would fight with wooden swords, and they would contest one another, and they'd come out pretty bruised, but they wouldn't actually kill one another. And there was a sense of gratitude actually for your competitor, for them bringing their best and competing and contesting with you. And this political philosophy basically argues that what democratic life is this contestation, this wrestling. And you should have a level of gratitude for your political opponents because they make you better. They sharpen you, or as Proverbs would say, as iron sharpens iron. But there's not going to be agreement on what it means to be an American. And so saying we all have to agree before we're going to contest is to actually shut down the conversation before you can have it.
Agon sounds nice until someone's trying to kill you. I mean, maybe that's a context.
Well, that's the thing. No, it's a wooden sword.
Yeah. Amanda, I think, yeah.
I agree that I don't think in the life and example of Jesus and his words, we have any loophole. I just don't think there's any condition under which we are allowed to duck out of being hospitable. Unfortunately, sometimes you feel like, man, life would be easier, right? It's an uncomfortable life. And I think we should expect to be mocked or derided or viewed as naive by the general culture. I think that is to be expected sometimes. I would say, though, I wholeheartely agree about this idea that pluralism is actually healthy. And I was just telling Matthew that my students and I were talking about ethnic cleansing and this interesting argument that ethnic cleansing becomes even an option on the table in the midst of a conflict when you have only one reinforcing division in a society. And something that that's wonderful about America, but that's also true of many other societies in the world, is that we have a lot of intersecting and overlapping forms of difference. And I think as long as all the difference is not on one fault line, which I think is what's the problem with this moment right now in the United States, I think the more we see in societies that there is kind of what we call cross-cutting cleavages in the societies. So there's a class difference, and there's a religious difference, and there's a ethnic difference, and there's a linguistic difference, and there's a regional thing going on. Those things are healthy, and those are the things that make democracy possible. Because, for example, in Lebanon, a Christian and a Muslim might disagree on foreign policy. They might disagree on these high-level security issues in the Middle East and who we should be allied with. But the reality is maybe they're both from a working class background or from a community that's riddled with potholes. And they can agree that they would like a better administration that would fix all these potholes. And so they work together at a community level to make their neighborhood, more drivable. And that kind of common cause that cuts across painful forms of difference is very good for a society. And so we shouldn't shy away from conflict, but we should hope and work towards kind of identifying areas of collaboration that are kind of across many different dimensions. I've
got a funny example of this. My research was in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, there's a very progressive political party it's called the Animal Rights Party. And their whole focus is on animal rights. And they wanted to make a rule in the Netherlands to ban all kosher and halal butchering practices. So the Jewish butchering and the Muslim butchering. And what was fascinating to see was that in this particular political issue, you had the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians all coming together and uniting to fight against the animal rights party. It was like the only people who could get these ancient religions to get along are the animal rights activists. So these are just kind of right, fascinating, allegiances that can form. But I just think if I could just drive one thing through here, the goal is not unity. The goal is not consensus. If you ever have a politician calling for everyone to come together and everyone to put their differences aside, you should run. That is not what we want. We actually want those differences. It's a question of how you navigate those differences and how you contest. Are you fighting with wooden swords or steel swords? So you should still fight. You should still disagree. You should bring your convictions into the public square and make your case. It is, are you looking to absolutely destroy the other? Or are you looking to contend with them? And that's the difference between agonism and what's called antagonism. Yeah.
That's good. And I'm thinking even the phrase agree to disagree, I think should be banned, because even that has a sort of implied consensus that we're gonna do some version of like, let's all sit together and put our differences aside. And it's like, no, our differences are still there. And so even that could be banned. I'm hearing a lot of, there's a sort of richness of complexity, a richness of almost contingency. But I think both of you are also suggesting that there's some sort of backbone or driving force to our call to hospitality. So I would love to push us towards that a little bit. And I think we've usefully already seen that the sort of poles of hostility and assimilation are kind of a false, some sort of false opposition. And there's a lot more kind of nuance in between. But what are the ways that this actually obtains on the ground? I mean, how do you live this out? What are the convictions that can drive the sort of hospitality that you both are describing?
I should go. Well, so on the night he was betrayed, it was dark. There were spears and torches and shouting. There was chaos. And Jesus' disciples decided either to fight or to flee, the common human response to chaos. If there's any sort of description of the current American political moment, it seems like that night is a great description of it. It's dark, there's shouting, there's fighting, there's chaos, and some people are opting to run away and some people are opting to fight. And there's one person amidst the scrum who refuses the fight or flight, and that's Jesus. And he reaches out a hand, an unarmed hand, to heal. And he heals someone who's not in his tribe, who's not a part of his group. In fact, he heals someone who's come to arrest him, to lead him away to his death. And I think that is a story that sticks with me as I think about the calling for Christians today. Yes, we're called to contend. Yes, we're called to be people of conviction. But we're also called to be healers. We're also called to be peacemakers. And what does it look like for us in a time of chaos and shouting, of pitchforks and torches, to be healers and to risk being wounded, to risk being mocked? I think that's what I'm wrestling with right now. And I'm thinking about that a lot.
Yeah, I think Matthew talked about it earlier, but when I was thinking about this question, I kept just returning to the notion that I think all Christians believe that Jesus died for us before we changed our ways, before we changed our mind, before we recognized who he was. And so I think initiating, being the first mover, being someone that is willing to put yourself out there. Sometimes all it takes is actually doing that to kind of initiate a cycle of productive conversation, of hospitality. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but I do think we are called to be active rather than passive in terms of our hospitality and to kind of move first. I always think of, one of my favorite lines in the Bible is in the parable of the prodigal son, where it's while he was a long way off, the father kind of embarrassed himself to run after his son, not knowing that his son was coming, repentant or with what kind of posture. His son could have been coming back in a myriad of different ways. And the father just picks up his robes, which is like deeply embarrassing in that culture for a man to do that and to just run like a child. And that's how God runs towards us. And so I don't think we have any way to get out of being initiators, of being actively seeking out loving people that are different from us.
We're not Jesus. So what do? We can't actually heal someone, I don't think, heal someone by touching their ear. And it's a high call. And
well, you might not be able to.
Sorry,
I'm pretty good at it. Yeah.
And no reverend in front of my name. So what does it mean for us to be not only made in the image of God? So therefore we have some of that, that quality to us, but we're also fallen, and so we're finite. We're not able to do the things that Jesus was able to do. We're not able to live up to that call. We're not able to initiate. Be the first mover every time. So where does that leave us as we're sitting here thinking about walking out, and here a pastor can help us, but also a political scientist can help us in thinking about what does this actually look like for finite humans to do this?
Yeah. So let's just talk about voting and being a part of the democratic process. I think that American politics has become increasingly tribal. And what I mean when I say tribal is we tend to think about politics really not having to do a whole lot with ideas and policy. Political debates have very little to do with should the marginal tax rates be 37% or 35%. Politics today has much more to do with conflicting ways of life and conflicting tribes, and a belief that if the other side wins, my way of life is in danger. So there's sort of this existential threat. And so I need to vote on behalf of my tribe, my people. And so I think what this looks like practically for us as Christians who are commanded to love our neighbor and to die to self is actually to think about our politics and our voting is we vote on behalf of our neighbor, not on behalf of ourselves. So we put our neighbor first when we're wrestling with different political issues or different candidates. We think about what would be best for our neighbors as opposed to what would be best for ourselves. So that's sort of a first orientation, something to think about, but we can talk about others.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I think as a political scientist, I often think at a higher level of abstraction about like, okay, what arrangement in a society would make for a better outcome? And I think after a lot of years of thinking about this question, I'm still pretty convinced that the American model of separation institutionally between, faith kind of institutions and the government is a really great idea, while at the same time allowing people to bring their full selves into the public square. Sorry for any French people in the audience, but I think the French model has not worked very well in a diverse society. That kind of secularism that says in the public square, there should be no religion and there should be no bringing of your faith into policy discussions. I think that has been deeply alienating to some people. It's actually made it hard for them to solve a lot of problems. So I think that after, thinking about systems all over the world at a higher level, that the American tradition of bringing your whole self into the public square while at the same time as individuals, but institutionally having the separation, I think is a really, it's better than any other model. It's an imperfect model, but it's better than any other I've seen in the world. But just to give you a survey, there are countries that have kind of stunning amounts of diversity, especially religious, much more than we do in the United States even. And they handle things in all kinds of interesting ways. Some countries have power sharing agreements so that in elections, people from the same religious community stand against each other, but they don't have, let's say, a Christian and a Muslim standing in an election against each other. They kind of take the religion part out of the equation and have elections be about other issues. And every group gets a certain allotment, let's say, in the legislature. Other systems have special court systems that are religiously based for personal status law, for divorce, adoption, inheritance, these kinds of things that religions do differently. And at the level of, criminal law, there's maybe some sort of consensus or agreement on a secular code. There's places that have, actual quotas for minorities. If, let's say, there's one small minority that's 5% of a population, to make sure that they have representation in a legislature. A lot of those systems work well in places that have had a lot of actual conflict and war, and they're coming out of that. But those systems fall short in a lot of ways because they reify these divisions, and they also just make people flat, one-dimensional. You are a Muslim, and that's who you are in this political system, or you are a Christian. And so I think that's why I have a lot of admiration for the American system and the possibility it holds for people to build coalitions across lots of different issue areas. I'm kind of going back to this thing. There are some places in the world where a lot of young people are like-minded and want to root out corruption in their societies or want change, but it is so hard for them to work together across those lines because their system is encouraging an ethnic or a tribal or a religious basis for political political cooperation only.
So I'm a big fan of America too.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of America as well, but I wanted to ask you this question though. But the two-party system, is that really working out for us? It seems to actually be.
That one's kind of rough.
Yeah, it seems to be quite detrimental to the American soul, actually.
It goes back to that. If you put everything, I don't forget the fancy phrase you use, but everything along the same lines, then cleavage was in there, something. Yeah.
I mean, my comparative politics students have a lot to say about this question. Yeah. I think the two-party system is just simply it's just an artifact of the fact that we have a winner-take-all system in our elections, and so and other things too. However, it encourages, in the best of American periods, a big tent kind of politics. So what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican is very multifaceted, and many people can be part of this tent, and it encourages compromises amongst them, at least. I think it also, the negatives is that it can kind of generate this very easy line of polarization. Multi-party systems have other struggles. They struggle to get things done and to keep a government coalition together. They also sometimes, if a system is designed to be multi-party to the extreme, it can become it can empower extremist voices because they get their own party now. So they can just go off the deep end. So there are bad things about multi-partyism too. But yeah, I wish we had more than two.
I want to ask a final question, but before I do that, Lisa's going to put the microphone in the middle, and I would encourage you in the audience to be thinking about a question that you have for our speakers. And when you're ready to have a question, you can actually come and stand up, and we can form a little queue behind the mic. And we'll just sort of take them as they come. So be thinking about that. If you're ready to move, tell your partner next to you, I'm ready to move, and I'm gonna go ask a question.
Yeah, and please don't be shy. We talk about religion and politics for a living, so we can handle a little bit of heat tonight. Yeah. So go for it.
So be thinking about those as you're thinking.
All the topics other people avoid, we
right here
are attracted to.
I want to push both of you a little bit. So I think we talked a little bit about the personal, the individual. And Matthew's example of a voter thinking about the person next to them when they're voting, I think is good. And then Amanda, you took us 30,000 feet, thinking about structures, but what's in between? How does this actually scale up? How does this call to hospitality that you're saying is a Christ-centered call to hospitality? It is, Christ is our example in it. We are finite. We're not able to do it, but we are called to try. And that's the Holy Spirit working in us, that's moving us towards our neighbors, changing those gestures. Does that scale, or is that just a one-off every time? It's like, I've got to have it, right here today. And then as soon as I'm with somebody else, as soon as I'm on PCH driving home, I got to have it again with the person that cuts me off. Yeah. How does it scale up?
Well, I mean, we want to be careful, right? Because what some Christians have done in their life is say, Jesus is great as a personal Lord and Savior, and his love command is great personally, but Jesus doesn't work for politics. In politics, there's sort of a different law, right? The law of the sword. And so Jesus is only relevant for my private life. So we don't want to do that. But I do want to say that when you're scaling up, prudence and wisdom become very important. I'll give you an example of this. I think it was 2015, after the Syrian civil war, there were Syrian refugees flooding into Europe, and Angela Merkel, the prime minister of Germany, let in about 500,000 or 600,000 refugees into Germany. It was this incredible act, very much out of a sense of German responsibility, and a lot of sort of European guilt over not demonstrating more hospitality to the Jews. And so they welcomed in hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees into Germany. And at the moment, it seemed like this really wonderful, hospitable act. But it turned out that Germany was not ready for that amount of refugees. And many things went wrong in the years that followed because of that, very generous decision. And one of them was the rise of a very far right political party in Germany, which is now extremely potent and powerful and quite racist. And so one of the important things for political leaders who are ruling at scale is to demonstrate a level of prudence and wisdom in terms of how they think about hospitality. And I mean, we can just think about that in terms of like how I run my home, right? I have 3 children. If I were to leave my door open and let all the kids in the neighborhood run in and out however they would like, and they come in and eat all of our food and so forth, after a while, I'm not really going to have much of a family, or my family's not really going to like me very much. And so hospitality requires some kind of boundary, some kind of wall, some kind of law or limit. And it's very appropriate for a country to have borders that close from time to time. And so hospitality is not sort of a wide open door with no limits. You do have to use prudence in these kinds of things. So there you go.
Amanda, and please, folks, let's start lining up and let's hear it.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. I think there's a lot of models out there of how, if we're thinking at that middling level of like, okay, what does it mean to, let's say, integrate refugees or asylum seekers into a community or not? I think it's really great in the American model. There are a lot of NGOs and nonprofit organizations that kind of bridge that gap between communities and newcomers so that people are equipped to succeed and to integrate well into the places they're going to. I mean, if that layer of nonprofits that kind of partners with the government to welcome refugees were to disappear, I think you'd have a lot more problems welcoming newcomers into the United States. I also think there's a whole spectrum of things you can do between a completely open policy and a completely closed policy. And I think our refugee processing kind of system in the United States is I think the most rigorous in the world. It's grueling to get accepted into the United States. It often takes years. And that process is, that's a model for how you let people in without kind of compromising the safety of the community of people inside. So I think that's a good example.
Great. Let's turn it over to our questions. Yeah.
Thank you for this discussion. You might have to turn it on. Oh, hi. Thanks for doing this discussion. I feel like I've already learned a lot. One of the things I really enjoyed, especially in the modeling portion of this discussion, was agonism. I hadn't heard of this before, but as I look at our society today, I see many who consider ideas to be harmful, or certain ideas to be harmful. In other words, it feels like there's disagreement about what's a steel sword in the agon and what's a wooden sword. How are those norms set? Is it just the dominant cultural or moral vision? How should we decide what's a steel sword and a wooden sword? Thanks.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think for me, in order for a healthy democracy to exist, you need to have resilient citizens who can handle a high amount of verbal contestation. And I'm a strong free speech advocate, so I think it's very important to have a very wide berth for free speech, because whenever we're defining hate speech, it's always interesting, who gets to define what hate speech is. And so it's really important that we develop resilience. It's also important that we have citizens who are respectful, or at least a good amount of citizens who are capable of respect and kindness, but it's really not something you can legislate. So this is the interesting thing about democracy, is that democracy it depends upon certain virtues like patience and humility and kindness, but it can't produce those virtues.
Right.
So democracy depends upon ways of life that it can't produce. It depends upon you learning table manners, essentially, but it can't teach you them. And so then the question is, where do people learn manners? Where do they learn civility? Where do they learn kindness and the willingness to listen? Yeah.
I'll be quick, since I know we do have other questions, but I have a follow-up about the civility. Is this different from hospitality? Because I believe that I have a call to hospitality as the Christian vision that you put out would say, but I don't expect everybody to have that call to hospitality. I mean, the self-sacrifice, it's very difficult. Is it different?
Civility and hospitality? I think they're very related. Hospitality conjures up in my mind the role of the host. So creating space, where civility doesn't conjure up in my mind a sense of space making. Yeah.
I also think that civility is like a civic virtue, whereas hospitality is a Christian expectation. So I don't actually expect every American to be hospitable the way that a Christian is called to be hospitable. But I do expect an American that I'm having a political conversation with to be civil. Yeah, I think they're like they operate at kind of different levels.
Thank you.
Yeah, also just thank you. This was really nice to listen to. It was really entertaining. And Professor Koch actually asked a question earlier that I feel like I can push on just a little bit further.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Okay, go for it.
And I'm just going to read it right off the page. It's tangential or like similar, so not exactly. But how do you find bravery when trying to extend hospitality? I'm a big believer in standing up for what you believe in, but I also want to extend grace and neighborly affection towards those I disagree with in an effort towards what I believe is justice. However, it is becoming increasingly common to be met with aggression when attempting to extend kindness and truth. How do you conjure the bravery to be steadfast in both your beliefs and kindness, and not to get too scared and run away, or even to not extend kindness at all in the first place? And that's for both of you.
Okay, so practice. So you're going to do it badly. So the best advice I can give to all of you is start to practice these conversations with your roommates. Start to practice these conversations with your classmates. Hang out late at night and stay at the table. Don't walk away from the discussion. Stick with it. One of the issues is, right, we run away. We don't want to stay at the table. And believe that the relationship is worth it, and believe that you can, so it's just going to take practice. Amanda and I can't fix it.
You're overcoming a fight and flight response. And so that takes like training, right? It's not going to be your natural human inclination.
Think of it like going to the gym. You got to work out. You got to push through that pain. And so courage is something that's developed over time. I think that's my thing.
I also would say that I think hospitality doesn't require you to be like the communicator of the truth. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like, it's okay that in that conversation, I didn't get to say what I believe is true, or I didn't get to be kind of this representative for the truth in maybe a theological sense. In that conversation, I was hospitable. I created a bridge to that person. I started a conversation, and hopefully it continues in another one. So you don't have to like dump all your truth on the person in the first interaction. I think actually that's probably a bad way to go. So I think kind of separating the fact that, yes, I have my convictions. Do I need to share them constantly and as the opener all the time? Probably not, right? There's a lot of ways to be hospitable and kind to people, and still be who you are, but that don't lead with, hey, this is the ways that we're different. Like, let's talk about them right now. So I think that's that like this is relational. This is iterative. This is not just like one-shot deals. And did I come out of it communicating the truth effectively?
Yeah. Well, let's chat more afterwards. Yeah. All right.
Hello. So kind of a question and a scripture. So my question is, how can we show love to our enemies and protect, the people that our enemies hate, right? And then I want your interpretation on a scripture that we read in one of our Veritas meetings. It's Proverbs 17:19, which states, whoever loves a quarrel loves sin, but whoever builds a high gate invites destruction.
Okay. I'm not going to interpret that scripture because I would need some time to study it and think about it and reflect on it. So in general, I don't want to, sort of come out and interpret that. Yeah, that's not a good way to treat scripture quickly. I think that for me, I do think I think that in regards to your question of defending others, I think that's probably where I would be more in favor of coming out with strength and courage in a debate, is on behalf of others as opposed to on behalf of myself or on behalf of my tribe. So I would say that you're probably going to be on better footing and a little more proud of how you behave if you're trying to defend someone who has no way to pay you back, someone who's not a part of your people. And so think about that. How often are your political opinions on behalf of yourself or on behalf of your tribe? And do you have the same capacity to fight politically for someone who can't pay you back? So are you on the side of the marginalized, the weak, who can't speak up for themselves? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say in for this question, I think Jesus offers us like a very clear pattern in the Gospels. So when Jesus is confronted with an opportunity to advocate for himself, to defend himself, to to protect his disciples, he kind of actually he doesn't take the bait, and he is. Those are the situations in which he is the most sacrificial, the most denying of himself, the most willing to be silent in front of his accusers. And yet, and he also shows a great deal of grace to people that are marginalized and kind of is the initiator of relationships and interactions with them. And yet he reserves his harshest words for people in positions of power and privilege who would use it to lord it over others. So when he's fighting on behalf of others, he's actually pretty aggressive. And when he is given an opportunity to fight for himself, he actually doesn't.
Well, are we to show love to those who hate the marginalized?
Yes, I think that Jesus is loving the Pharisees by calling them out on their stuff.
Yeah. So
That's love
loving
too.
is not being a pushover. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay.
I'm just going to direct traffic here because you got a bunch of folks behind you, and let's do two at a time. So we'll hear your question and then your question, and then they can respond to both of them.
Okay.
That way, there might be some overlap sometimes.
Great.
So
Yeah.
please.
All right. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great combo. I'm going to go home to my roommates and have a bunch of crazy discussions now. Okay, I'll get to my question. I'm a poli-sci student, and I'm taking a class called Christian Political Thought, and it's been very invigorating and also super enlightening at the same time. And I've been wrestling just in my thoughts. And we recently finished reading a lot of Thomas More, who is a Christian humanist and just lawyer, cool guy. And he has this huge emphasis on decorum and a huge emphasis on being a master of interpretation. Like, you just really got to understand what the person's really saying. And of course, he's talking about politics and how to advance in politics. But I took those two topics and I kind of added it to my question. I wanted to ask you guys, how might the principles of decorum and interpretive mastery inform a public theology of hospitality, especially in a time like today when social and political walls often replace cross-cultural dialogue or even coalition building?
Let's hear yours as well, and then they can answer both. Yeah.
Hello. My question was, in light of everything you said about being initiators and taking the first step towards hospitality and dialogue, is there anything you can say about how we can tell when the other side is taking the first step towards hospitality and towards dialogue, especially where we may not otherwise realize that they're taking that step?
You can choose which one you want to answer, how you want to answer both of them.
Those are pretty good. Those are pretty good.
Okay, I guess I'll offer a thought on the interpretation, and I think this part of this is listening better, and just trying to not, how sometimes you're in a conversation and you're just waiting for your turn to talk.
Yeah.
And you're kind of planning your points in your head, and that's like all you're doing when the other person is talking, instead of actually listening to what they're saying. And so I think I haven't read Thomas More in a really long time, but I think that's a great kind of thing to take into conversations and a way to be hospitable when political discourse is the thing that is at hand. Because I think understanding where the person is coming from helps you see them as a human being, made in the image of God, and that can change everything. So I don't know. That's just like my 2 cents on that one.
Thomas More. I promised Matthew that I wasn't going to say anything about the 17th century, but this is about the 16th century, so I can say it. Thomas More, 16th century.
Nerd.
His way of interacting with his opponents was to quote their entire polemic back to them. So this is called, the fancy word is animadversion. You would reprint their words first, and then right after that, you would print your response to it. And so there's something about what you're describing there, Amanda, of like, he's forced to occupy the words of the other person first, and then you respond to it. That's a version of exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. So one of the things you can tell is just that the person can say back to you what you're arguing for. They can repeat it back to you, and they can say, I hear that you're saying this, and you can recognize yourself in their description of you. And that's a wonderful goal with the person you're debating with, is can you say it back to them in a way that they would own it for themselves? Or are you creating a straw man that they would say, look, you keep painting this picture of me that I don't recognize for myself? Then on the decorum thing, we did a podcast episode on the importance of concession speeches after you lose an election. That kind of decorum is critical to the health of democracy, of thanking your opponent, of wishing your opponent well, in acknowledging that you lost, and in promising to fight on in the future, that you're going to continue this fight. But with your decorum, you respect the process, and you say the democratic process is more important than my thing, right? And even though I think my party is better for the country, I believe that the country and the democratic process is more important than me and my party. And so the concession speech is a form of decorum that's critical for democratic life. And we often kind of write these things off as just sort of politeness, but it's one of the most important things about American democracy, is that we concede defeat.
No, we didn't take up the what if someone moves, how do you know whether someone else is moving first? But maybe we can pick that up in the...
Well, I said that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can tell it. You can tell if they're moving first if they can say it back to you.
Okay, great. Let's hear two more.
Hi, my question is pretty short, but I was just wondering, how can churches, universities, or workplace practice hospitality towards people from minority culture whose differences aren't immediately visible? And also, how do you deal with hospitality while having a sense of cultural pride?
My question is, how do we maintain this model of agonism in a society where surveillance is so incredibly easy, and where, because as I'm sure you're aware, thanks to social media and the ability to quickly record and reproduce events, you can take anything anyone says and then suddenly make it a public announcement. And so therefore, your little battle with wooden swords, your opponent just pulled a real sword on you. How do we continue talking if we have those hazards?
Yeah. Okay. Did you remember all that? Okay. Well, I think it just reiterates the importance of person-to-person meals, embodied talk, and really trying to abstain from debates on social media. The media itself makes it difficult for you. It's not just that you're if you get into a social media fight, it doesn't mean you're automatically just a bad person for doing that. It's actually the media itself. It doesn't work well for listening. And so I would just reiterate the importance of dorm room, meal table kinds of conversations that are built off of relationships instead of fighting with strangers.
The problem is, even if you're talking with a small group of friends, there are many, many, many cases now where somebody pushed a button in their pocket and suddenly what you said to your group of friends, it just got said to the world. So you get involved in a debate on social media without even knowing you're there, because your words get posted there without your consent.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm curious what you're going to say about this, Matthew, but I think this is why real thick embodied community is really important. And I think it's okay to exercise some discernment about when and where you have these conversations. After the war in Gaza started, I gave a couple of presentations at churches, kind of just teaching them the history of and why we were at this point. And I kindly asked everyone, as an act of hospitality to me, to not record, because you could just take one little line and make it into a viral meme, and there we go, you know? And so I think having some practice of community, of life in person together, some baseline trust established before you go into kind of the most difficult conversations. There's a lot of ways you can be hospitable without, you know, like it could be conversation 5, conversation 6, that's the really hard one. And I think that's why building in person human community is important. So you can trust people not to press that play button, you know.
And then on the question about churches and workplaces and schools, I think that really is on the leaders to model forms of listening and disagreement and discussion. You know, unfortunately, there are churches where disagreement is not allowed, and there are workplaces where, and campuses where disagreement is not allowed, and sort of groupthink cultivates. And so you actually need to cultivate sort of a leadership culture in which disagreement can be had. That's very important. But then also, I think you were talking about minority voices. I don't know if you have any, you know, thoughts on that, but, you know, obviously there's sort of techniques and whatnot, but I think you do have to have this sense that we will be enriched by a diversity of voices, not we will be endangered by a diversity of voices. That difference is not going to threaten us. It's actually going to enrich our wisdom and our discussion. So the Apostle Paul talking about there's hands, and in the body of Christ, some people are a hand, some are a foot or an ear or an eye, that you sort of have this posture of course we need this voice to improve this church, because we can't all be the same. But
Yeah, I think the answer for churches and universities and workplaces will be different, because those are kind of really different institutions with different missions of their own. But I can think of an example from my church. I go to a bilingual church, Spanish and English, and the two services have people that are very different from each other, socioeconomically, primary language spoken at home, and all kinds of other differences. And there have been at times discussions about, we do a combined service that's bilingual once a month. And we've had discussions about, do we just go bilingual all the time? Do we kind of meld everything? And I think it's interesting, the majority culture part of the church is maybe kind of like, oh, I don't know, okay, whatever. And the Latino side of our church is very protective of spaces when they can just be together and just be themselves and be in their culture without having to explain themselves or translate what they're saying or what they're doing or why they're partaking in a particular, cultural tradition. And it's very important to have spaces of togetherness too. And I think for people in the English side to understand that separation doesn't mean that we don't love you and that we're not, one body together, but that sometimes the Latino side just needs time by themselves, to just speak their language and not have to explain themselves and translate and kind of conform and assimilate to the dominant culture. So I think it's both, right? I think it would be a mistake to go separate, for our church to break apart. I think it would be a mistake for us to just do everything together all the time.